There is opportunity at arm's length every moment of every day. The opportunity, the thing that you are desperately praying for. The man in the Starbucks line behind you might be the person that was sent to unlock it and give you the opportunity that's going to change the course of your life. But so often we are caught up in our head and we are caught up in the noise and we are shut down and we're not open to the opportunity. We're not open to listening to that whisper. Welcome back to this episode of the Low Bottom High Rise podcast with me, your host, Moira Casaba. I am so excited to share this series with you. So it's called LTTW, Listen to the Whisper. It's something that I talk about a lot. If you've followed me, you hear me say that over and over again, right? Listen to the whisper. Whenever I'm interviewed on anything, but most likely a podcast, right? That's where I'm being interviewed the most. The last question that a lot of hosts will ask, is there anything else you want to impart to the audience? And I can tell you that the first time I was asked that question, it took me a quick second. I was like, gosh, what is like the last thing I want to leave the audience with? But it came to me pretty quickly. And that is how I live my life, how I view the world, how I operate in the world, what I teach everybody that I mentor, whether it's high-level entrepreneurs or lower ticket, I'm talking on my social media. And that is at the foundation of everything. Really needs to be this concept of always listening to the whisper. I have an entire podcast episode, so you can scroll back on my podcast episodes and listen to the one entitled Listen to the Whisper. But it is such a powerful concept, and it is such a life-changing concept that I really wanted to do a series, right? It's the one thing that people always write back to me and say, that so resonated with me, or I had this moment and you came into my mind and I heard, listen to the whisper. And I acted upon it and everything changed. And this is the story behind it, right? I hear story after story after story. And so I want to do a series today or over the next few weeks of just little snippets of things that are literally happening in my life in real time so that you can really identify with this concept of what does that mean? First of all, listen to the whisper, and how do I do that, right? And to me, that whisper can be a lot of things. It can be called a lot of things. And semantics is just semantics, right? It doesn't really matter to me whether I am referring to that voice of God, whether it's the voice of the universe, whether it's a higher power. It could even be my own intuition, my own gut instinct. But there is a difference, a huge radical difference between the voices in our head, right? That think these are the pros and the cons, and we kind of get into that spiral of overthinking versus that whisper in our heart. It's hard to articulate actually what that feels like, but it's a knowing. It's a knowing and just this feeling of yes, this feeling of gosh, it really is hard to articulate. It's a feeling of knowing. It's a feeling of yes. It's a feeling that is deep-seated in your soul versus your head. It's almost like a download from above, a block of thought that you're given that you can't even put into words. It's just a knowing. And so this concept is really, I believe, the answer to every single thing you want to accomplish in your life. Every dream, every goal, everything you want to be, everything you want to become, right? Your fitness goals, your financial goals, your relational goals, your spiritual goals. But when we are guided from that knowing, that whisper, that voice, life becomes miraculous. It really does. And I believe that tuning into that whisper, tuning into that intuition, the more that we do it, it's like a muscle to be flexed. The more we flex that muscle, the easier it gets. So in the beginning, it might be hard to be like, I don't know what's my head. I don't know what's my heart. I don't know what's, the thoughts between the whisper. I can't decipher. But the more you do this, the clearer it becomes. And the more that we do it, the more synchronicities happen. The more, for you law of attraction people, which I love, the more things just come into your life. And what I want to impart to you is that it's there 24 hours a day, every moment of every hour. When we pull out on the street and, it doesn't matter if I take a right or a left or go straight, it's kind of the same distance. I can tune into that whisper. It sounds silly, but which way should I go? And that dictates everything, right? It's like the butterfly effect. The butterfly effect is like something, it's encapsulated somehow with like the flutter of a butterfly's wings in some part of the world can cause a tsunami in another part of the world. Every single thing is interconnected. And so I'm going to tell you a little story that just happened a few days ago that I have just been holding on to, the miracle, right? The divine that was there. Simply because I was aware. I was tuned in, tapped in, right? And so this happened after a huge event. And this is important because it was a huge event that I had been at for 5 days, completely and utterly exhausted. Like, exhausted is the understatement of the year. I had spoken, I had hosted a party for 200 people, I had rehearsals, I was just going. It really is the event of the year for me that is the most demanding. And I had to get up at 4:45 to hop on a plane to come home on a Sunday morning. I probably slept 3.5 hours that night. So every reason to not be tuned in, right? Every reason to be like comatose. But I got on the plane, and I was in this great energy, even though I was tired. And the second plane I got on, I went to sit down. I said hello to the lady next to me, being polite. It's 6 a.m. at that time. And I went to just put my earbuds in and, zone out and kind of read my book or listen to whatever. But I wasn't thinking about this in the moment, but I noticed, I was aware that there was a conversation that was very whispered, actually. They were whispering. And she was like, no, it's not going to work out. To what I look up and see, I think is her spouse. And I realized that they're in different seats. And then there's another group that are in different seats. And because I was in a good energetic place, I was able to go, wait, do you want to sit with him? And she's like, yeah, but it won't work because they're sitting over there. And I said, like, there's always a way. Like, we'll figure it out, right? Be open, be helpful, give back to the world, small thing. We can figure this out. So I immediately said, wait, if you go over to that seat, but that person sits over in this seat and then they come here, it was like, shuffling all the cards. I was like, then everybody gets to sit with who they want to. I didn't have anybody to sit with. It didn't matter to me, but I was aware enough to say, pay attention to this. And I'm thinking probably in the moment, not really thinking at 6 a.m. exhausted, but I can be a good person, right? I can help this situation out. And so everybody switched seats, like 1 million people switched seats. We sit down and there's a new person next to me. And, over time into the first 30 minutes to an hour, we kind of talk a tiny bit. I mean, it's early. Nobody wants to be talking on a plane that early in the morning. And one thing in the conversation led to another thing in the conversation, led to another thing in the conversation. And she was sitting beside me because her 2 best friends that she was on a trip with were across the aisle. And all of a sudden she says something to one of her friends. And her friend leans over and says, wait, your name sounds really familiar. And I was like, well, I'm on Instagram, I have a podcast. And again, guys, sometimes I'm like, I just want to go to bed, right? But be tuned in to what is around you. And I share this, I'm going to pause the story for a second because I share this because I absolutely believe that when we are tuned into that whisper of take this little action, say this little thing, be open and have a conversation, there is opportunity at arm's length every moment of every day. The opportunity, the thing that you are desperately praying for, the man in the Starbucks line behind you might be the person that was sent to unlock it and give you the opportunity that's going to change the course of your life. But so often we are caught up in our head and we are caught up in the noise and we are shut down and we're not open to the opportunity. We're not open to listening to that whisper. And I feel like we're all going to, meet our maker one day and he's going to be like, oh, sister, there were literally, I put this angel in your path and this angel in your path and this opportunity in your path. And it was literally at arm's length right in front of you tens of thousands of times. And you just didn't see it. You just didn't tune in. You just didn't listen to that whisper. And so, my whole life didn't necessarily change from this plane ride conversation, but we end up talking. And I literally fell in love with these women next to me. Deep, soulful, incredible conversation that I would have missed. They were coming to Charleston on a girls' weekend. I ended up meeting them 3 days later in Charleston to see them again, to connect again. I'm actually talking to them about joining them on a trip. This potential could potentially completely change relationships and friendships and experiences going forward. But I almost missed it. And I was meaning to make these podcast episodes really short and sweet with little snippet stories just to remind you that it's right there. But I'm thinking now of a different conversation. Somewhat of a similar situation, actually. This was last January. I had spoken at a big event in Tampa, and I was actually taking a night flight home. So I had been in sessions, I'd been on stage, I'd been done all the things. I was, talking to all the people. I had to really be on in those situations. And so I get to the airport. I can't wait to get to the airport because I just need to fall apart a little bit. I just need to go into my shell, right? And I sit down next to a very angry person, angry at the next level. And I'm like, oh dear God, this is really when I want to put my earbuds in. And guys, I usually don't talk to people on the plane. I usually just go into my zone and do my work, read my books, listen to things, whatever. And the flight attendant came over at one point and said, sir, you got to get off your phone. And he lost it. And he was like, my father's in the hospital. And to the point where I was like, oh God, I'm so uncomfortable right now. They're talking over me. He's screaming. And the flight attendant walks away. And I can feel this anger and this energy literally shoulder to shoulder. And I am so uncomfortable. But I hear the whisper. And the whisper a lot of times calls us into the uncomfortable. And I sat there with it and I was like, oh gosh, I do not want to poke the bear, right? I just want to put my earbuds in, fly home to my family, and all is good in the world. But I hear the whisper, and this is what it feels like. Say something. Say something. And so often in those say something moments, we're in fear of judgment. We're in fear of reaction. We're in fear of what they're going to think of us. We're in fear of what that's going to look like, right? And finally I said, hey, I'm really sorry. I had to walk through some really tough stuff with my dad, and I get it. I just want to say I'm sorry. He completely shifted his energy in a moment. And I thought, I get it, God. I just needed to tell him that somebody else understands your pain. But what I wasn't prepared for was what came next. He starts talking about his dad, telling me stories about how they grew up, telling me stories about his father with his kids. And he says, what happened with your dad? And I end up telling a perfect stranger the heart story of when my dad passed away. And he's crying and I'm crying. And then he goes on at one point in the flight to say something about it. He was showing me pictures of his grown kids. And I was like, man, you did something right. Like, you raised some really exceptional kids. Not exceptional in the flashy way. He was just telling me about them, and I could tell that they were incredible kids, and I felt like there was this line of faith in their family. But he didn't say anything to that until I asked him another question about, like, how did your child end up living in a different country, and what's the story there? And he said, well, they went on a mission through this organization. And he's like, all of my kids did. He had 4 kids. I really want to meet this man again at some point in my life. And he's like, you haven't heard about this mission group that's like really prevalent in the United States? And I was like, no, like, we're super involved in Young Life. We're super involved in FCA, Fellowship for Christian Athletes. And I was like, I have never, ever, ever. He's like, it's been around forever. And he just starts telling me about it and telling me more and telling me more and telling me more. And I'm thinking, in my knowing, in that whisper, this is something I need my children to do. This is something that my children are going to do. This man was seated here for a reason, and I broke down that barrier for a reason. And this conversation will impact and change my family forever, generationally, with the action that I'm now going to take in my life for my children because of a conversation with a stranger on an airplane. That's the knowing. That's the whisper. And again and again and again, I just want you to hear that it's there. And sometimes in those moments where you just hear the whisper and maybe you have a conversation or you turn right instead of left or you do the thing, you don't see the fruit of it right away. And sometimes we'll never be able to see it, because I do absolutely believe in divineness. I think sometimes that there is, somebody looking down above and just saying like, oh, I'm so glad you turned right instead of left, because you were going to get in a major car accident if you'd gone the other way, and you just avoided it. And we don't know that. We don't see that. Think about, because this is so common, think about how many times, and living from the perspective now in the space of leaning into this belief, how many times are we angry and frustrated because somebody's late out the door, a kid's not getting in the car fast enough, we spill our coffee all over us and we're like, oh, I'm late, I got to get in the car. And you finally get in the car and you get on the road and there is a major accident and traffic is locked up. And my first thought is, thank God. Thank God I spilled my coffee. Thank God my kid wouldn't get out of bed. Because if I had been 2 minutes earlier, we would be in that accident. It would have forever changed the course of our life. That's the gift of being tuned into the whisper. And you're not always going to see it, and you're not always going to know. But I promise you, the more you tap in and tune into that voice, you will start to build trust in that voice, that it gets easier and easier and easier. And I believe the harder it is to listen, the bigger the miracles. Because I could tell you 1,000 stories and go back and listen to that podcast episode with some really big stories of my life where I listened to the whisper, where it made no sense in my head, where every part of my intellect and my brain was like, no, no, no. This is stupid. This doesn't make sense. This is the worst move you could ever make. Every friend, every family member is saying, no, this doesn't add up. Absolutely not. But I listened to that whisper in my soul, and it put me on paths that I couldn't have dreamt up. It allowed me to intersect and meet people that changed the course of my life. That's how powerful this is. And so welcome to your Listen to the Whisper series. We are going to do story after story after story, and I'm going to continue to share my stories and my listener stories and my friends' stories. And so often I think the smallest listens and the smallest examples are the most powerful. Thanks for listening, you guys. I would love to hear your stories. I would love to hear back from you. So message me, send me an email, shoot me a DM. Please share this episode. Share with your friends, share with your family. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It really helps just to push this message out, which I believe that I am just the messenger and all of this is through me. And so let's do good work in the world and share it with everybody. Thanks for tuning in.